Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Dev Diary, where today we continue working on our Vampire Survivors clone featuring Candy. Now, last time we began work on the upgrade system, which included a menu, our button system, and a convoluted approach to keeping track of the player's weapons and character stats. It was so unnecessarily complicated that I decided to completely rewrite it all from scratch. This includes weapon attacks, which, as I learned the last episode, are far more complicated than I realized. So, let's get to the code. Let's start with the attack code. While we are still using structs to keep track of weapons, we're now really using structs. Each weapon not only holds some general data for timers and the like, but also their own variables and, more importantly, functions. So starting with the whip, the first function adds reference data for the actual whip attack. The second function is the actual attack code itself. Much like the previous version, this system works on a timer, and for as long as the whip exists, a collision rectangle is active. Any enemies who pass into said rectangle have their hurt event triggered. The next two functions are generic functions that tell the code what to do every step. In the terms of the whip, if the whip has yet to be activated, it waits until the timer maxes out, which then triggers the whip code to begin running. Next, we basically create a whip emitter, adding new whip data each time another counter reaches its desired time. This was necessary due to the player's ability to spawn more than a single whip, which also needed to be displayed at different heights and scales. A lot of which is taken care of in the final function, which is a draw-specific function for the whip to be displayed similarly to Vampire Survivors. The code still needs some refining for timing and scale, but this new improved version provides us with a far better system to use whips and other weapons. Speaking of which, let's take a look at the updated magic bolt code. The code is actually very similar to the whip. The first function spawns the magic bolt projectile, similar to the previous code. And the ticker for this weapon is almost exactly the same as the whip's ticker, only instead of adding whips, it creates projectiles, and will continue doing so until it reaches however many the player is able to create at the time. In fact, I'm curious if a general function could be created to allow for all the weapons to use the same system. Anyway, the magic bolt does not currently have a draw function, as there's nothing else to really draw. So let's move on to our first new addition, the garlic. The garlic weapon finally mixes things up by not being an emitter. The ticker code for this weapon simply creates a collision circle around the player at the given size provided, and much like the whip, will trigger the enemy hurt event on collision. And the draw code simply draws a circle to reflect the size of the collision circle. Nothing too complicated here, but the garlic item itself doesn't seem to be all that complicated to begin with. Although I wouldn't be surprised to be wrong on that one. Anyway, moving on to the next weapon, the Laurel. And since we haven't implemented player damage yet, this one is a bit barren. The ticker code for this one simply restores uses of the weapon over time. And for now, when protection is enabled, a semi-transparent yellow circle is drawn around the player. Again, this one is very simple and unfinished, but is really convincing me that a general function for the timer-based behaviors may be in order. Anyway, the final weapon I added this session was the Pentagram. Currently, the Pentagram is the most basic of the weapons with just a single ticker function. For testing purposes, every 2 seconds would trigger the weapon, eliminating all nearby enemies, which I determined via distance check. The code then rolls the chance to delete any experience orbs. If they roll above the player's current chance value for the weapon, then it's deleted. And as with every weapon thus far, this one still needs tweaking, especially when it comes to the area of effect. Evolved versions of these weapons also need to be added, but we'll have to wait until more features are added first. For example, a proper upgrade system. So, player character stats are still stored in arrays, and increments for said stats are also now stored in arrays. The new upgrade system is much more straightforward and easier to use than the old. So first, if the upgrade is a weapon, it executes something similar to last time. However, instead of updating a bunch of arrays, it updates the struct variables themselves, making the changes to said stats way easier to follow. Now, if the upgrade is for a character stat, then the player's stat array is increased based on the corresponding values from the increment array. Now, unfortunately, I wasn't able to add any new upgrade data to test because the rewrites took so long. However, as already mentioned, this new system is much more useful and easy to use than the original. I'm honestly not sure what I was thinking, but it was clear after having to take an unexpected break that things could have definitely been done more efficiently. And if some functionality can be streamlined for even more general use, then the addition of future weapons may become even easier. We'll have to wait and see though, because this game is updated so frequently say that by the time this video is released, who knows what will have been added by then. But anyway, that brings us to the end of today's Dev Diary. So if you enjoyed today's entry, consider leaving a like. Be sure to also subscribe and hit that bell if you haven't already. And let me know what you think of the new code. Also, have you ever completely rewritten huge chunks of your own projects? Leave your thoughts and opinions and stories in the comments. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.